In the vast reaches of the Pacific War, not every naval loss was marked by smoke on the horizon or survivors clinging to wreckage. Some ships simply vanished. One little-known fact, buried in intelligence files and post-war shipping records, is that multiple Imperial Japanese Navy convoys departed in wartime secrecy and were never seen again by enemy or ally alike. By early 1942, the Japanese Empire depended on long, vulnerable sea routes stretching from the home islands to newly conquered territories in Micronesia, the Solomons, and Southeast Asia. Major bases like Truk Lagoon, Rabaul, and Palau became logistical hubs, feeding fuel, ammunition, food, and troops to island garrisons. The convoys leaving these ports often sailed under strict orders, minimal radio traffic, night departures, and carefully staggered routes designed to evade U.S. Navy detection. American intelligence, however, was listening. At Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy's OP-20G signals unit had begun to read portions of Japanese naval traffic, while submarine commanders studied emerging convoy patterns. In theory, every Japanese convoy that sailed should have left a trail, intercepted messages, sightings, combat reports, or wreckage. Yet by mid-1942, gaps began to appear. One such case involved a convoy that departed Truk in August 1942, during the tense early weeks of the Guadalcanal campaign. Japanese records indicate several cargo vessels, escorted by a destroyer division of the 8th Fleet, tasked with reinforcing outposts under pressure from U.S. Marines. Allied code intercepts confirmed the departure window, but follow-up traffic, arrival acknowledgments, or distress signals never appeared. To American analysts, the silence was unsettling. The human stakes behind these movements were immense. Japanese merchant sailors, often reservists or civilian conscripts, crewed slow, lightly armored transports that stood little chance against submarines or aircraft. Escorting destroyers like those of the Fubuki or Kagero classes were fast and modern, but stretched thin across thousands of miles of ocean. Every convoy represented lives, resources, and strategic necessity balanced against increasing Allied dominance. U.S. Navy submarines were already prowling these waters. Boats such as USS Gudgeon, USS Greenling, and USS Growler reported aggressive patrols near Truk's approaches. Yet, in patrol reports for August and September 1942, no confirmed sinkings matched the tonnage missing from Japanese logs. Even after-action summaries from the Guadalcanal air campaign failed to account for the absent ships. A fragment of insight emerges from a post-war translation of a Japanese Combined Fleet memo, dated September 1942. It noted severe uncertainty regarding convoy outcomes and referenced vessels listed as Miki-kan, failed to return. The phrase carried weight. It implied neither sunk nor damaged, but simply unaccounted for. No families were notified with certainty. No public losses were announced. American intelligence officers noticed the discrepancy as well. A declassified U.S. Navy analysis later observed that several convoys ceased to exist operationally without corroborating combat claims. The implication was unsettling. Either Allied forces had destroyed them unknowingly, or something else had occurred beyond the view of records and reconnaissance. Fuel shortages, navigational errors, and the Pacific's unforgiving weather were constant threats. Typhoons could scatter formations and overwhelm smaller transports. Mines, both American and Japanese, drifted unpredictably. Yet such explanations rarely erased all evidence. Oil slicks, debris, or survivor reports typically followed disasters at sea. In these cases, the ocean gave up nothing. The mystery deepened as the war progressed. By late 1942, Japan tightened convoy secrecy even further, classifying certain movements and limiting written documentation. This bureaucratic opacity, combined with wartime destruction of records, would later frustrate historians attempting to reconstruct events. For modern scholars, these vanishings challenge the assumption that every wartime loss can be neatly traced to a battle or a known attack. They suggest moments where command decisions, environmental factors, and the sheer scale of the Pacific intersected to erase ships almost completely from history. As the battle for Guadalcanal raged and the Pacific War intensified, more convoys would sail under cover of darkness, carrying supplies Japan could ill afford to lose. The digital archive confirmed the mission date, But the final status of the 1942 truck convoy was a missing variable. By mid-1942, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz authorized aggressive patrols deep into Japanese-controlled waters, including the Philippine Sea, East China Sea, and approaches to the home islands. Yet the results were uneven. While some sinkings were dramatic and well-recorded, confirmed by torpedo tracks, explosions, and survivors, others left little trace. Patrol reports from submarines such as USS Trigger, SS-237, and USS Grayback, SS-208, mentioned sightings of convoys that vanished into weather fronts or darkness, never to be encountered again. In several cases, Japanese traffic indicated departures, but no corresponding arrival or loss reports. At the heart of the mystery were intercepted messages. The U.S. Navy's OP-20G unit and its British counterparts were reading portions of Japanese naval codes, though not always in real time. Intelligence summaries from late 1942 include notes of expected convoy arrivals overdue and signals gap persists. Analysts marked these incidents, but could rarely tie them to confirmed attacks. Japanese convoy doctrine contributed to the confusion. Ships often sailed in small, widely spaced formations to reduce visibility and limit losses from a single attack. Escorts rotated frequently, and merchant captains were given discretion to divert or scatter under threat. A convoy might fragment under fear of submarines, only to be picked off by aircraft or lost to navigation errors, each incident producing incomplete records. One convoy, believed to be operating between Yokosuka and Saipan in November 1942, illustrates the problem. It was reportedly carrying aviation fuel and replacement aircraft parts, critical to Japan's defensive perimeter. U.S. submarines reported no confirmed sinkings in that window, yet Japanese fuel shortages worsened inexplicably weeks later. Post-war fuel allocation records suggest the cargo never arrived. Human testimony is scarce. Japanese escort commanders rarely survived loss at sea, and merchant crews were often lost with their ships. In one rare diary recovered after the war, a Japanese naval officer wrote of ships that did not answer roll call, a phrase hinting at losses known internally but never fully investigated amid the chaos of wartime command. The Pacific itself played a role. Weather fronts could mask attacks or scatter debris over hundreds of miles. Strong currents carried wreckage far from sinking points, complicating search efforts. In some cases, submarines believed they had damaged ships rather than sunk them, leaving uncertainty on both sides of the conflict. By early 1943, the U.S. submarine campaign intensified further. New tactics emphasized night surface attacks using radar-equipped boats, technology the Japanese lacked. Yet, even with improved records, not every engagement could be tracked. Some torpedo hits were silent. Some convoys sailed into storms and were never heard from again. For Allied planners, the vanishings were both encouraging and troubling. Missing convoys suggested success in disrupting Japan's supply lines, but the lack of confirmation made it difficult to assess effectiveness. For Japanese command, the disappearances fed paranoia and secrecy. Losses were often classified, and families received vague notices or none at all. Modern historians reviewing both Allied and Japanese archives face the same frustration intelligence officers felt in 1942. Partial signals, incomplete logs, and vanished ships that seem to fall between categories of sunk, damaged, or lost. As Japan prepared desperately to hold its southern defenses in New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, convoys became even more vital and even more vulnerable. The ocean was tightening its grip, and the silence surrounding these missing ships was growing louder. Ahead lay 1943, a year of intensified air power, broken codes, and desperate resupply missions. And with it would come one of the most perplexing cases of all, a convoy that vanished en route to New Guinea, leaving no wreckage, no survivors, and no clear explanation. In early 1943, as the Pacific War entered a brutal war of attrition, Japan launched one of its most carefully guarded resupply efforts, an operation meant to sustain its collapsing position in New Guinea. What followed would become one of the most perplexing convoy disappearances of the entire conflict. The target was Lae, a critical Japanese stronghold on the northeastern coast of New Guinea. Leh anchored Japan's defensive line and served as a forward air and logistics base for operations in the Bismarck Sea. American and Australian forces, operating under General Douglas MacArthur's Southwest Pacific Area Command, had already begun isolating the garrison. Japanese planners knew that without steady fuel, aircraft parts, and trained personnel, Leh would fall. In February 1943, Japanese naval records indicate the departure of a classified convoy from Rabaul. It consisted of multiple transport vessels, reportedly escorted by destroyers from the 3rd Destroyer Squadron. Cargo manifests, fragmentary but revealing, suggest the convoy carried aviation fuel, replacement engines for Mitsubishi Zero fighters, and several senior naval aviation specialists. Their arrival was crucial. Allied intelligence picked up traces of the movement. U.S. Army Air Force's units of the 5th Air Force, flying from bases in Port Moresby, intensified reconnaissance missions over the Bismarck Sea. B-24 Liberators and PBY Catalinas scoured suspected shipping lanes, expecting contact similar to previous engagements. Yet day after day, crews reported nothing. No ships, no smoke, no oil slicks. This absence was unusual. The waters between Rabaul and Leh were among the most heavily surveilled sea routes in the Pacific. Only weeks later, in March 1943, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea would demonstrate just how lethal Allied air power had become against Japanese convoys. But this convoy vanished before such an outcome could occur. Japanese communications deepened the mystery. Intercepts reviewed post-war referred to inquiries from Leh's command requesting estimated arrival times. These messages went unanswered. Within days, the convoy was removed from active planning documents and listed as Weixiang, details unknown. No formal loss report was issued. One surviving Japanese naval aviation officer later recalled that fuel allocations at Leh were reduced abruptly in late February, without explanation. Aircraft were grounded not by enemy action, but by empty tanks. For the pilots defending New Guinea, the missing convoy meant dwindling sorties and rising vulnerability. Allied forces searched for evidence of success. Submarine patrol logs from the region show no confirmed attacks on the convoy's route during the critical window. No U.S. or Australian units claimed the sinking. This absence of claims made the disappearance unique. There was no victory to announce, no enemy losses to count. Weather was a potential factor. February 1943 saw severe storms in the Coral and Bismarck Seas, with sudden squalls capable of scattering formations. Japanese transports, often overloaded and poorly equipped for damage control, were vulnerable to capsizing. Yet even storm losses typically left debris. None was found. Some historians have suggested mines as a possible cause. Both sides had sown defensive minefields near key ports, often with incomplete charts or inaccurate records. A convoy entering such waters at night could be destroyed without witnesses. Still, no minefield records definitively match the convoy's disappearance. From an investigative perspective, the most troubling element is silence. No distress signals were logged, no emergency broadcasts were intercepted. Not even internal Japanese after-action reports described the loss in detail. In a navy known for meticulous record-keeping, such gaps are rare. For Japan, the loss accelerated the collapse of its New Guinea strategy. Leh would fall to Allied forces in September 1943. Its defenses weakened, in part, by shortages that traced back to this missing convoy. For Allied intelligence, the incident remained an unresolved anomaly, proof of success without evidence of action. In modern naval studies, the Leh convoy is often cited in footnotes rather than chapters, overshadowed by larger, bloodier battles. But its disappearance represents something more subtle and unsettling: the idea that in total war, entire operations could simply vanish, swallowed by ocean, weather, and secrecy. As the Allies pressed forward and Japanese supply routes grew ever more desperate, the Pacific continued to claim convoys in ways that defied easy explanation. And soon, even the most advanced codebreakers in the world would confront messages that suggested something was very wrong near the Solomon Islands. By mid-1943, the Pacific War had entered an intelligence-driven phase, where battles were often decided long before ships or aircraft ever made contact. In dimly lit rooms at Bletchley Park in Britain and the Naval Intelligence Centers at Pearl Harbor, analysts began to notice something deeply unsettling: Japanese convoy orders that led nowhere. The Solomon Islands had become a focal point of this hidden war. After Guadalcanal, control of the surrounding seas was fiercely contested, with U.S. Navy carrier task forces, land-based aircraft, and submarines saturating the region. Japanese command responded by tightening operational secrecy. Convoy movements were encoded, compartmentalized, and often excluded from broad circulation, even within the Imperial Japanese Navy itself. British and American codebreakers, however, were piecing together fragments. At Bletchley Park, sections of Japanese naval traffic, shared with the U.S. through established intelligence channels, revealed convoy departure instructions from bases like Shortland Harbor and Bougainville. These convoys were believed to be reinforcing isolated garrisons and delivering radar components, ammunition, and engineering equipment vital to airfield construction. What alarmed analysts was the pattern that followed. Messages indicating departure dates and escort assignments were intercepted clearly, but subsequent signals, arrival confirmations, unloading reports, or return schedules never appeared. The traffic simply ended. One British report noted a consistent absence of terminal convoy communications, an understated phrase that hinted at something far more troubling. American carrier operations in the region were extensive. Task forces built around carriers such as USS Saratoga and USS Enterprise launched repeated strikes against Japanese airfields and shipping. Submarines operated aggressively along expected convoy routes, yet no official after-action reports accounted for the missing convoys. No pilots claimed sinkings. No submarine skippers filed contact reports. The Japanese Eighth Fleet, responsible for much of the Solomon Islands area, was already under immense pressure. Destroyers had been lost in night actions, fuel was scarce, and morale was deteriorating. In this context, the disappearance of entire convoys may have been deliberately obscured. Japanese naval culture discouraged open acknowledgement of failure, particularly when causes were unclear or reflected systemic weakness. A partial insight appears in a captured Japanese staff document dated late 1943. It references transport operations terminated without result near the Central Solomons. The phrasing suggests missions that failed completely. Ships lost, cargo gone, personnel missing, but without recorded combat to assign blame or lessons learned. Environmental factors again complicate the picture. The Solomon Sea was notorious for treacherous navigation, sudden storms, and uncharted reefs. Some convoys may have sailed into weather systems that dispersed them irretrievably. Others could have run aground or collided in darkness during evasive maneuvers. Still, such losses rarely erased all traces. From a strategic perspective, these vanishing convoys had real consequences. Japanese forces in the Solomons suffered chronic shortages of food and medical supplies. Units reported to be reinforced remained under strength. Construction projects stalled. The missing shipments quietly shaped the battlefield, weakening Japan's position without a single decisive engagement. For Allied intelligence, the mystery provoked debate. Were they underestimating their own effectiveness? Had submarine or air units scored unrecognized victories? Or was Japan losing ships to its own internal failures, overloaded transports, insufficient escorts, and chaotic command structures? Modern historians reviewing combined Allied and Japanese records still struggle to align the data. Tonnage statistics do not reconcile cleanly. Entire convoys appear only at the moment of departure, then fade from documentation. The ocean, once again, provides no answers. As 1944 approached, Japanese logistics entered a phase of desperation. With routes through the Solomons increasingly untenable, command planners resorted to riskier, longer voyages and experimental cargoes. Convoys would sail with technology and materials never meant to fall into enemy hands. Some of those convoys, launched in the final year of the war, would vanish more completely than any before them, carrying secrets that may never be fully recovered from the depths of the Pacific. By late 1944, the Pacific War had become a race against inevitability. American forces, advancing through the Mariana Islands and toward the Philippines, had cut deep into Japan's defensive perimeter. In response, Japanese Naval Command authorized a series of last-ditch resupply convoys, missions marked by extreme secrecy, experimental cargo, and an acceptance of extraordinary risk. These convoys were dispatched into waters dominated by Allied air power, radar-equipped ships, and a mature U.S. submarine blockade.
Yet they carried cargo deemed vital to Japan's survival: advanced radar components, coded communications equipment, aviation fuel refined under emergency conditions, and technical specialists ordered to relocate before bases fell.
Some shipments were reportedly classified at the highest levels, with details known only to a handful of officers. One convoy, believed to have departed from Covert in October 1944, was bound for the Philippines as U.S. forces prepared for the Leyte invasion. It reportedly consisted of several transports, escorted by older destroyers and kaiboken, escort vessels increasingly pressed into service despite limited anti-submarine capability. Allied intelligence anticipated intense shipping activity, but even amid the chaos of the Leyte Gulf campaign, this convoy was never officially engaged. American submarines prowled the area relentlessly. Boats such as USS Darter and USS Dace were active in Philippine waters, claiming significant successes against Japanese warships. Air patrols from U.S. Navy and Army Air Forces units saturated the sea lanes. In theory, no convoy could pass unnoticed, yet Japanese records show no arrival report, and Allied logs record no confirmed sinking matching the convoy's composition. The absence of survivor accounts is particularly striking. By 1944, U.S. forces routinely rescued Japanese sailors when possible, interrogating them for intelligence. From this convoy, none were recovered. No lifeboats were sighted. No prisoner reports emerged. The ships were simply gone. In some Japanese post-war interrogations, former officers alluded to special transport missions that were expunged from standard logs. The goal, they suggested, was to prevent sensitive technology or documentation from being traced, even in defeat. Whether this meant deliberate scuttling under certain conditions remains unclear, but the implication adds another layer to the mystery. Fuel shortages plagued Japan in the war's final year. Transports were often slowed or rerouted, increasing their vulnerability. Some historians argue that mechanical failures or fuel exhaustion may have doomed convoys far from patrol routes. A powerless ship, drifting without radio transmissions, could vanish into the Pacific without a trace. By December 1944, Japanese command structures were collapsing under air raids and resource scarcity. Record-keeping suffered, archives were destroyed, and many officers were killed before surrender. The fate of certain convoys was never fully documented, leaving historians to reconstruct events from fragments. Strategically, the disappearance of these final convoys sealed the fate of isolated garrisons. Without radar upgrades, communications equipment, or skilled technicians, Japanese defenses in the Philippines and beyond were fatally compromised. The losses contributed silently but decisively to Allied success. For investigators today, these vanishings represent the final evolution of a wartime phenomenon seen since 1942. Convoys that departed under orders, carried men and material critical to the war effort, and were never conclusively accounted for by either side. As Japan edged toward defeat in 1945, the truth behind these losses slipped further out of reach. And when Allied investigators finally gained access to captured naval archives after the surrender, what they found would raise even more questions than answers. When the war ended in August 1945, the silence surrounding Japan's missing convoys did not end with it. As Allied occupation forces began the painstaking process of reviewing captured Imperial Japanese Navy records, investigators expected clarity. Instead, they found absence, files that ended mid-sentence, shipping registers with unexplained gaps, and convoy listings marked with a single chilling phrase: missing, cause unknown. Allied naval intelligence teams, including U.S. Navy historians and analysts attached to the Joint Intelligence Center in Tokyo, cross-referenced Japanese shipping logs with American submarine and Air Force after-action reports. In many cases, the numbers aligned cleanly. Sinkings claimed by U.S. submarines matched Japanese losses almost exactly. But in several instances, particularly involving classified or late-war convoys, Japanese ships simply disappeared from the ledger without any Allied claim to explain them. One internal Allied report from 1946 noted unreconciled losses occurring beyond documented engagements,
estimating that tens of thousands of tons of Japanese shipping could not be firmly attributed to combat action, weather, or accident. The report stopped short of speculation, but its implication was clear. The historical record was incomplete. Japanese naval officers questioned after the war offered little certainty. Some admitted that in the final years, especially after 1944, convoy losses were sometimes left uninvestigated due to operational collapse. Others suggested that deliberate destruction of records had taken place, either to conceal failures or to prevent sensitive information from falling into Allied hands. In a defeated nation struggling to rebuild, few had reason or ability to pursue unresolved naval mysteries. Families of missing sailors were among the quiet casualties of this uncertainty. Without confirmed sinkings, death certificates were delayed or never issued. Loved ones were told only that ships had failed to return. In Japanese post-war society, these absences became a form of unresolved grief, loss without explanation, mourning without closure. From a modern historical perspective, the vanished convoys represent the limits of wartime documentation. The Pacific Ocean covers more than 60 million square miles, much of it unexplored even today. In 1942, 1943, and 1944, vast areas were effectively invisible once ships passed beyond radio range. A convoy could be destroyed in minutes and erased in weeks, leaving no trace beyond unanswered messages. Technological progress has recovered some answers. Wrecks discovered by deep-sea exploration have occasionally matched ships long listed as missing. Yet many more remain undiscovered, lying at depths beyond current surveys. Each wreck, when found, answers one question, but raises others. Why no distress call? Why no record? Why no survivors? Strategically, these disappearances underscore how the Pacific War was won not only through dramatic battles, but through attrition that operated quietly and relentlessly. Ships that never arrived weakened defenses, grounded aircraft, and isolated troops. Their absence reshaped campaigns without ever appearing in headlines. For historians, the enduring mystery is not whether these convoys were lost, they clearly were, but how easily they vanished from the combined memory of two warring nations. War is often remembered through decisive moments and clear outcomes, but these convoys remind us that much of history unfolds in shadows, through losses recorded imperfectly or not at all. Today, the Pacific remains a vast archive. Beneath its surface lie ships whose names appear only once in official documents, at the moment they sailed. Their stories end not with gunfire or surrender, but with silence. And in that silence, the vanished convoys of World War II continue to challenge our understanding of how total war consumes not only lives, but records, answers, and certainty itself.